If you're looking to spice up your mana base and add extra utility, play these 15 secret MDFC lands. My name is Nathan, this is the Salty Productions YouTube channel. This video is sponsored by My Hopes and Dreams. If you want to sponsor a video like this in the future, my email will be down in the description below, but for now, we are eating dreams for dinner. This video was inspired by the land cycling set that was released in the Lord of the Rings set in 2023. You guys have probably heard of cards like Lorien Revealed, which is a 5-mana blue sorcery where you can draw 3 cards, and it has island cycling for 1 colorless, which means you can pay 1, discard the card, and search your library for an island card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. The beauty of Lorien Revealed is that it is never a dead card, because ultimately what you would normally play this as is actually a tapped land, because if you have an untapped land already on the field, you can pay the island cycling cost by tapping that land, and then you search for the land that you are going to play for the current turn, and assuming that it enters untapped, you can then play that land, and what you are left with is essentially the scenario where you have played a tapped land. Now, other than Lorien Revealed, which is probably the most popular out of the set, there is also Generous Ent, which is a 6-mana green 5/7 creature, treefolk with reach. When it ETBs, create a food token, and it has 4 cycling for 1. The black is a 6-mana 6/5 creature troll called Troll of Khazad-dûm, and Troll of Khazad-dûm can't be blocked except by 3 or more creatures, and it has swamp cycling 1. And then there is Eagles of the North, which is a 6-mana 3/3 bird soldier with flying. When Eagles of the North enters battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain first strike until end of turn. The red one is Oliphant, which is a 6-mana 6/4 elephant creature with trample. When Oliphant attacks another target creature you control, gets +2/+0 and gains trample until end of turn with mountain cycling 1. The beauty of these lands is that they are essentially tapped MDFCs that can fetch you any color of mana that you want, because it does not stipulate searching for a basic land type. So these are sort of the golden standard for what I would consider maximizing the utility in your deck by including some of these effects that do more than just enter as a tapped land. I know with actual MDFC lands, you have great utilities such as Malakir Mire sees a lot of play, or Malakir Rebirth on the front side, as is probably more popularly known. There's also the Valakut Awakening and Selendi Visions as well, which are good utility tapped lands. However, the downside is that these only actually tap for that 1 color. Whereas with these Lord of the Rings cards, you can search up any typed land with the type specified. So if you wanted to, you could search up the triomes, the tricycling lands, or if you wanted to just search up a shock and then shock in a land that can tap for 2 colors, you can do that too. The beauty is that these cards can play into your deck synergies while also functioning as a land on the backside, even though it may not appear at first glance. So Generous Ent I play in my food deck, my Sam Loyal Attendant food deck, because it has food synergies. Troll of Khazad-dûm can just be a good beater in the late game, and I actually play Eagles of the North in several Blink decks that I have, or ETB decks, because you can abuse that first strike, which is very useful in the late game when you're trying to bust through your opponent's defenses. So these are sort of the, like I said, the golden standard for what we would look for in a card that adds a lot of utility while also functioning as a land. There's a couple of really good options out there as I was searching for similar effects, and I just want to share essentially 15 cards of those that I've found. One excellent option is called Bushwhack, which is a 1-mana green sorcery. Choose one. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. Or target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. So this is essentially a Hagra Mauling that only costs 1, that can search you any color of land, which is absolutely excellent. I cannot believe this does not see more play, because Bushwhack can, again, if you need to play it as a tapped land, you just pay the 1, search up a basic, and then play that as your land for turn. On EDHREC, Hagra Mauling is in 49,000 decks and Bushwhack is in 23,000 decks. So any deck that is looking to have a big creature, perhaps maybe even with Death Touch, this card would be a slam dunk in a deck like that in place of a normal tapped land or perhaps even a basic land. Our next card in Golgari colors is called Dig Up, which is a 1-mana green sorcery. It has Cleave for 1 colorless, 2 black, and a green. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. If the Cleave cost was paid, it reads, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So Dig Up is in 30,000 decks on EDHREC, and much like Lorien revealed, this card should be in many more decks because it is simply never dead in the early or late game. If you draw this or top deck this on turn 6 or 7 when perhaps you're all out of gas, I would gladly pay 4 mana for a tutor that grabs any card out of my deck. Is it better than Lorien revealed? Probably not, because in my opinion it's better to pay 5 mana to draw 3 cards than it is to pay 4 mana to tutor for a card. However, this would fit in a combo-centric deck more than something like Lorien revealed. And if you have extra synergies with instants and sorceries, that's even better. Our next card is called Tithe. It is a 1-mana white instant. That's excellent. Search your library for a Plains card. If you control fewer lands than target opponent, you may search your library for an additional Plains card. Reveal those cards to all players and put them into your hand. Shuffle your library afterwards. So this card will automatically just grab any Plains, so it can color fix you. It does not specify basic, and you can also actually draw an additional card, essentially by searching up for an additional Plains. Now, white has this slew of effects where it's more catch-up ramp, more so than sort of getting ahead. But I have found in my deck building that typically is not that big of a hoop to jump through because you can play cards like the bounce lands, where you actually return a land to your hand, or assuming that you don't go first and you are not ramping ahead of somebody, then you can just play this and it's not even a problem. So these cards are ironically worse when you go first because you are the first one to play a land, but there's also the scenario where, you know, there's probably going to be somebody in green that's ramping at the table, and so it's not typically that big of a deal to have to find somebody who has more lands than you. So Tithe is great. It basically functions as a tapped land, and the upside is that you get to tutor for another land. Now, my only caveat is that Tithe is quite expensive at around $22 as of this recording in March of 2024. So there is that. Just keep that in mind, that this is one of the pricier options on this list, but still a great include nevertheless. So now we will look at some options that are a little bit more niche in certain deck archetypes. Our next option here is called Thirsting Roots, which I think is a great include in Super Friends, Poison decks, and +1/+1 counter decks, because it is a 1-mana green sorcery that says choose one, search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle, or proliferate. Now again, we still have that same ability. We can search for any basic of any color. In the late game, if we don't need that effect, we can proliferate, which in Super Friends and Poison and +1/+1 counter decks in particular can represent actual lethal, because often Poison just needs that one extra tick of proliferate to finally get that opponent to 10 poison counters. +1/+1 counters often have sort of multipliers, some like hardened scales like effects, so that proliferate might represent, you know, essentially a 1-mana put 2 or 3 +1/+1 counters on your entire board. And in Super Friends, you might again need, you know, 1 or 2 more counters for your walkers to ultimate. So a great include for any of those decks indeed. For the Aristocrats decks, we have Caravan Vigil, which is a 1-mana green sorcery. Again, search your library for basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. And it has a Morbid. You may put that card onto the battlefield instead of putting it into your hand if a creature died this turn. So this can be a ramp spell if a creature has died. So this, in my opinion, would actually beat out effects like Rampant Growth or Farseek in a green Aristocrats deck, especially especially if you're in Golgari and you don't need that extra color fixing. This is great to function as a much more efficient ramp spell. And in Aristocrats, I mean, you are sacrificing creatures pretty much every turn of the game, so that morbid hoop to jump through is almost negligible. But this is a great include for Aristocrats decks or any decks that care about creatures dying, or even decks that care about your opponent's creatures dying. If you were to run like the Plague Crafter type of effects, if you are sort of in that like Turgid adjacent archetype where you want your opponents to be sacking creatures, then again, this would be great. And unfortunately, it is not instant, so if your opponent does kill something on your board, you can't cast it. However, if they do kill something at instant speed on your turn on your board, then you can cast it in your second main phase. But, you know, we typically probably wouldn't play it for that. You'd probably want to build around it for the synergy. But Caravan Vigil, great for Aristocrats. The next card on our list is close to me because I have played this in my Sam Loyal Attendant food deck. This is called Many Partings. It is a 1-mana green sorcery that says search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle, and create a food token. So it's essentially a tapped MDFC land that makes a food, which is great in food decks. Our next card is pretty recent. It is from Murders at Karlov Manor called Analyze the Pollen. It is a 1-mana green sorcery. As an additional cost to cast a spell, you may collect evidence 8. Now, that's as an additional cost on a May ability, so you don't have to do that if you don't want to. Search your library for a basic land card. If evidence was collected, instead search your library for a creature or land card. Reveal that card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Now, as a reminder, with collect evidence, that essentially says exile cards with total mana value X or greater from your graveyard. So you can cheat around this a little bit by playing the, I believe they're called like the paired cards where they're like next to each other. I'll show an example on screen. I can't think of one off the top of my head. But when you actually consider the converted mana cost of those cards, they are added together. So you can also use cards that have or are reduced in cost, something like Primeval Protector or Dig Through Time, where there's like a delve cost or it is reduced by some amount so that collecting evidence becomes very simple. But in the late game, when you probably are in like a self-mill type of deck, you'll probably have enough cards where you can make the collect evidence trigger. And so in that case, this is a 1-mana creature tutor if you don't want to play it as a tapped land, essentially, by just searching for the basic. So 1-mana creature tutor, it just can't be beat in Commander. So this is just a great include for any sort of self-mill type decks. Speaking of self-mill type decks, Traverse the Ulvenwald is a 1-mana green sorcery that says search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle your library. If there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, instead search your library for a creature or land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So this one is not quite as good in my personal opinion as Analyze the Pollen because we need 4 or more card types, and there are just not as many self-mill decks that care about different card types in their graveyard. However, this is an option if you are in a self-mill deck and you want the added utility to be able to search for a creature in the late game. Next, we step into some pretty niche archetypes. If you are in a Gates deck, Open the Gates is a 1-mana sorcery. Search the library for a basic land card or gate card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Nine Fingers Keen, if I remember correctly, is the card where essentially you are trying to amass as many gates as possible. And so this, in addition to just netting you a basic land, it can actually tutor you up a gate card and so can function in a gate slot in those decks. So again, with those decks, you know, there's sort of a limited number of gates, so this helps to sort of create a gate slot all on its own. So if you're playing gates, Open the Gates is pretty much an auto include. Next, if you are in a green energy deck, Attune with Aether is a 1-mana sorcery that says search the library for basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. You get 2 energy counters. So again, just sort of a tapped land that essentially gives you energy counters, which is great. The caveat with this is that there are not that many green energy decks in Commander, but if you are in that archetype, more power to you. Next, we have Brave the Wilds, which is a 1-mana green sorcery with Bargain, which means you may sacrifice an artifact, enchantment, or token as you cast the spell. If this spell was bargained, target land you control becomes a 3/3 elemental creature with haste that's still a land. Search the library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. So this essentially gives you the option to sack some junk you have on the field to animate a land into a 3/3 elemental. So is it good? Not particularly. The only place I could imagine this being somewhat useful is maybe in like an elemental tribal deck or something where maybe even like a Raga Draga style of deck where you want to actually be animating lands or creatures that can tap for mana abilities, or if you just care about the elemental creature type. So, is it worth it to sack an artifact, enchantment, or token to get that effect? Depends on what you're sacking, and will 3 damage do a ton? Not really. The key is that you need some sort of synergy behind it. So like if you have something that says, elementals you control get +2/+2, which is an effect I'm just making up off the top of my head, better example would be like Coat of Arms, right? So if you have 5 elementals in the field and this would be your 6th, then you're going to make a giant creature out of this, and so this becomes worth it to play. So I think it just really sort of depends on what deck you're in order to determine if this card is worth it. But this card is definitely niche, but an option to consider. And with that, those are all of the cards that I would consider slotting into a deck. However, I do have some honorable mentions I want to just go over quickly because they do the same effect. So these are more useful if you want the color fixing ability or if you care about sorceries or any sort of effect that really isn't a land. Our first option here is Lay of the Land, which is a 1-mana green sorcery. Search the library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So again, if you need to, put something into your graveyard, essentially like if you just want a card in your graveyard, this goes to the grave while searching for a basic, and will essentially self-mill you. Or if you care about having sorceries in your graveyard that you can recur, this is an option as well. There's also Reclaim the Wastes, which is a 1 green sorcery with kicker for 3 colorless. Search the library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. If this spell was kicked, search the library for 2 basic land cards instead of 1. So this is similar to Tithe, but instead of paying 1 and meeting the condition, we have to pay 4 for this effect. So again, is this card good? Not really, but I wanted to mention it that it is a potential include if, again, you want the ability to nab more basics and you want stuff in your graveyard. Then we have Renegade Map, which is a 1-mana artifact. This artifact enters the battlefield tap, and then it has tap, sack it, search your library for basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So this is sort of a tapped MDFC that you can pay forward, but it doesn't actually allow you to get the land until next turn. So this one is not very good. I probably wouldn't play this in any of my personal decks, but it is still that same sort of effect that I wanted to mention, that it's a little bit slow. And similarly, we have Ash Barrens, which is just a colorless land that enters untapped. You can tap it to add a waste, and then it has basic land cycling for 1 colorless. So this is where, if you're in some sort of a Lord Windgrave style of deck and you just want lands in your graveyard, you can discard this to search for that basic. And then you have a card in your graveyard ready to be recurred or something like that. And that concludes our list of secret MDFC lands in Commander. If you are interested in squeezing every single little drop of synergy out of your deck, and you care about any of the deck archetypes that I mentioned in this video, including some that can just fit into any deck, then I would seriously look at these for including. Price-wise, they're rather cheap. Almost all of the cards in this review are quite affordable. I think only Lorien Revealed and Tithe are decently expensive as of March of 2024, but the rest of these I think you can definitely get on a budget, and they are definitely worth looking at if you're in the colors that can play them. So with that, I would like to conclude the video. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it. I always appreciate it, and it shows me that you like this kind of content. And if you enjoy watching these types of videos, please consider subscribing. Always appreciate that. And yeah, I will post more content like this in the future. And with that, thank you all for watching once again, and hopefully we'll see you all in the next one.